The Senator for Virginia.
Mr. President, I'd like to make remarks as if we're in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 weeks ago, after almost 2 years, Special Counsel Mueller filed his report with the Attorney General. The Attorney General sent us a short letter summarizing the major findings of the report. Simply put, a summary is not going to cut it. The Attorney General's own letter discusses the vast extent of the Special Counsel's investigation, mentioning over 500 witness interviews, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, 230 orders for communication records, and almost 50 orders for pen registers, and actually 13 requests to foreign governments. This is an extraordinarily extensive investigation that yields a rich collection of facts about Russia's attack on our democracy. The American people deserve to see the results so they can judge the facts for themselves. We know from court filings, news reports, and the Senate Intelligence Committee's own investigations that the Russians attempted to influence the Trump campaign in many ways. At least 17 individuals in the Trump orbit had over 100 publicly released contacts with Russian officials or intermediaries. And yet, with all those 100 contacts during the midst of a campaign, somehow not one of those individuals, even those contacted with explicit offers of assistance from a hostile government, called the FBI to report those offers. And yet, the Attorney General's 4-page summary of this sprawling investigation, a summary that, according to press reports, may not even accurately reflect the Mueller report, focuses almost exclusively on the criminal portion of the Mueller probe, with barely any mention of the Special Counsel's counterintelligence investigation into these contacts. The Senate Intelligence Committee, the only bipartisan counterintelligence investigation still standing, has documented extensive efforts by Russians to reach out to those around then-candidate Trump. A few examples we have documented and have been in the public domain: candidates Trump's efforts to negotiate a business deal to build what was going to be called the largest building in all of Russia, negotiating on that deal throughout the whole primary process, and even potentially, at least according to his attorney, Mr. Giuliani, maybe negotiated all the way through the election. Data that may in itself not have violating laws, but I frankly think if I was a Republican primary voter, I would have liked to have known that my potential presidential candidate was still trying to do a deal with Vladimir Putin's government. We also, in our investigation, have exposed ongoing communications between the president's campaign chairman, Mr. Manafort, and Konstantin Kilimnik, who has ties with both Russian intelligence and the oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Our committee has made multiple criminal referrals to the special prosecutor based on what we learned in witnesses' efforts to lie to us and obstruct our investigation. This is what a counterintelligence investigation is all about. We need to fully understand what the Russians were trying to do, and we need to be able to warn future campaigns and candidates about the lengths and the new tools that hostile governments will go to undermine our democracy. Now, I believe we can't make that full guidance to future campaigns without a full release of this report. Now, some observers have said that the report cannot be released without jeopardizing sources and methods. Let me be clear. As Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, no one is more sensitive to those concerns than I am. But the resolution that we have specifically states that the report should be released to the public in accordance with the law. Clearly, sources and methods would not be released under this standard, nor would grand jury information. What we're talking about here is basic transparency. Let's make sure the full Mueller report is released to Congress, including the underlying documents and intelligence, and then let's make sure that the American people see as much of this report as possible and as soon as possible. And let's do it in that bipartisan way to protect sources and methods. Therefore, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that as if in legislative session, the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H-Con Res 24, expressing the sense of Congress that the report of Special Counsel Mueller should be made available to the public and to the Congress, and which is at the desk. Further, that the concurrent resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object, I'm all for transparency. I think we should know as much about this investigation into the president as we possibly can. We do know that we only know part of the story and that the Mueller report is only part of the story. What we also need to know is how this originated, because I think it's very important that we not turn our country into this back and forth where each successive party tries to use the apparatus of government to investigate the previous president. We do know now that the investigation of the Trump campaign reached to the highest levels of the White House, all the way up to President Obama. What we don't know is, was President Obama told that the evidence to get this investigation started was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign? We need to know that. So that's not part of the Mueller report, but that's something that I'm asking that we should attach to this resolution. We need to know, was President Obama told that this information came from the Hillary Clinton campaign? We do not yet know whether or not John Brennan was involved and to what degree. We do not know whether or not John Brennan colluded with British spy agencies to spy on Americans. It's illegal for our CIA to spy on Americans. We don't yet know whether or not John Brennan was colluding with British spy agencies and other spy agencies to get them to do his dirty work. We do know now that John Brennan, who had the power to listen to every American's phone call, who had the power to listen to every person's phone call in the entire world, we know that he is a rank partisan. We now know that John Brennan has called the president a traitor, essentially saying the president should be put to death. This is the guy that was in charge of this investigation. This isn't an objective person. We need to know about all of the communications. So I'm asking unanimous consent that we modify this resolution and that we find out and gain access to all the communications between Comey, Brennan, and Clapper, and the White House, and President Obama, because I don't want to ruin this great country with politically motivated investigations year in and year out. This had to do with placing spies and infiltrating the Trump campaign. Do you really think that our intelligence agencies should be infiltrating each other's campaigns? I don't want this to happen to a Democrat. When President Trump came to the Hill a week ago, he says this shouldn't happen to the next Democrat president. We should not misuse the power of our intelligence agencies to go one party after another. How can we get on with the people's business if we're allowing the government to be consumed with this kind of stuff? So I ask unanimous consent that we amend the resolution and that we look at the entire story, not just the investigation, but how we got here. The media wouldn't even print this fake dossier. It was so scandalous and so unverified and has been turned out to be untrue, and yet this was the basis for beginning the investigation. This was the basis for doing something extraordinary, implanting spies and informants into the Trump campaign. So I ask unanimous consent that we amend the resolution and that as the Mueller report comes forward, we also come forward with all of the communications between the people who got this started, and we discover once and for all whether or not these people misused their office in starting this investigation.
Does the senator from Virginia wish to modify his request?
Reserving the right to object, I would simply point out to my colleague from Kentucky that the intelligence community, in their January 2017 report, reached a unanimous conclusion. That conclusion was that Russia massively interfered in our elections. They did it in forms of hacking into personal information and releasing it subjectively. They did it in terms of at least touching the electoral systems in 21 of our states' election systems in ways that, frankly, found a great deal of vulnerabilities. And they did it in ways that manipulated social media that quite honestly caught our intelligence community and the social media companies off guard. Our intelligence committee spent a year reviewing the conclusions of the intelligence community and in January of 18 unanimously agreed that the intelligence community's findings were correct. The Russians interfered. They did it on behalf of one candidate, Mr. Trump, against another candidate, Ms. Clinton. And for those reasons, I respectfully object to my colleague from Kentucky's.
Is there objection to the original request? Senator from Kentucky. Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I'll simply close out. I hope we can move past this. The President himself has called for the release of the report. The House, in a rare stroke of unanimity, voted 420 to 0. I think many in this body would like to move beyond this issue, and the only way we're going to be able to move beyond this is to get this report released, get it out to the American public, let those of us who are charged with the intelligence community responsibilities see all of the report, including the underlying documents. I hope we can get to that point. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President, I yield the floor.